It's International Children's Day today. The day honors children's rights according to a 1925 proclamation in Geneva. In Africa, there's a lot of work still to be done to protect the continent's children. Currently, 3 out of 10 children in Africa live in conflict zones and are exposed to numerous risks. The challenges include the recruitment of child soldiers, how children are affected by drought and food insecurity, child marriages, and education challenges. Well, let's get you more perspective on that story now. I'm joined live in our Nairobi studios by Ibrahim Alubala. He's the head of advocacy and campaigns for Save the Children Kenya. Ibrahim, thanks very much for joining us. There are so many children caught up in conflicts here in the continent. Tell us a little bit about the Kenyan children and how they are affected.
Well, I think it's 3 things first. One, children constitute more than 50% of the entire population in this country. According to the last census that we had in 2009, close to 53% of the population is composed of children. And you would imagine that if there is any conflict affecting the 30 million plus Kenyans, then the bulk would be children being affected. Now, what has happened in Kenya over time is we've had a situation where we've had ethnic clashes that are largely linked to the political cycle. So you'd remember in 1992, 1997, in 2013, we had a situation where we'd probably have children being affected in what we call the ethnic clashes. So that is the situation for children. But again, it's important to note that Kenya is not at the same level as other countries. We know that in many other countries we've had situations where children are being recruited into armed conflict. Including governments themselves recruiting children to join into conflicts. You would remember in the case in the cases of Sierra Leone and the International Tribunal for Rwanda. Part of the cases against people who are eventually convicted largely involved recruitment of children into armed conflict. You'd remember the case of Charles Taylor. Remember the case of Lubanga in Rwanda. Children are actually being recruited into armed conflict. We also have situations like in Nigeria. I think the case of the Chibok school where we had girls being kidnapped in April 2014 largely involved children again being caught up in a situation of crisis. But in Kenya, it's largely been around ethnic clashes, and I think we are getting to a level where we'll address some of these issues. Right,
and Kenya now has announced that in the next 5 months it shall close the Dadaab refugee camp. How will children in that camp be affected?
Well, I think it's important to note that the closure of the suggested closure of the camp is something that is being driven by the government. And there is, I think we need to remain alive to the fact that in November 2013, the government entered into what we call a tripartite agreement between itself, the government of Somalia, and UNHCR. What came out was that the repatriations will be done in a voluntary manner. It will also issues of the security and safety of the refugees and issues of dignity will be taken into account. The 3 issues of voluntary, safe, and dignity, actually the cornerstones of the 2013 tripartite agreement. And therefore, it's too early for us to begin making any insinuations in terms of what that will happen. We know that the government of Kenya will respect its international obligations, and I think that is what we can say for now.
What are African governments doing right to protect the children, and which countries would you say we can learn lessons from?
Well, I think not to blow our own trumpet, Kenya has done very well in terms of protecting children. I would begin by looking at the commitments that Kenya has made at the international level. Kenya has signed almost all protocols that relate to protection of children, starting from the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. There is an optional protocol on the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which we call the second optional protocol, that protects children from armed conflict. And Kenya has actually ratified this instrument. And it has not only ratified the instrument, but also gone ahead to say that children, the government of Kenya will not allow children to be recruited into non-state violence, but it will also ensure that the government does not recruit children into, into its armed forces. So Kenya is, I think, a model in this regard. It's also important to note that even for children who are victims of armed conflict, the ones that you talked about in the Dadaab refugee camp, this camp has been in existence for the last 25 years, and the government has pumped in a substantial amount of money to ensure that this happens. And besides the government also being involved in this, non-state actors and the organization that I work for, Save the Children, among many other organizations, have also been very instrumental in ensuring that the rights and welfare of children in these refugee camps are also upheld.
Right.
So Save the Children, for example, runs a big education program in the Dadaab refugee camp, and also works on issues of child protection to ensure that we have child-friendly spaces within the refugee camps themselves.
All right, Ibrahim, let's leave it there for now. Thanks very much for
Thank
those
you very
insights. We had here in studio Ibrahim Alubala.